I mean, Stockholm is a beautiful city. I had the privilege to spend like 2 weeks here in January finishing the final mix of this film and to enjoy this, very cold winter. So it's good to be back and to be presenting the film now in its final form in this same city where we sort of finished the film. Yeah, I was very sort of interested in a strange feeling I had that I think I share with many people when you lose a family member and uh, the strange ways we sort of keep that family member alive and how we project our loved ones onto objects, onto places, and especially onto other people. Um, and so I was sort of thinking about this idea and thought to myself, what if a teenage girl who is at that point in their life where they're looking for references and sort of trying to define themselves sees this comparison, this projection, and decides to inhabit it and to sort of discover who she is through her dead grandmother. Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic, grief, because it touches all of us, but in very different ways, and so there's no one way to go about it, which I think is very interesting. Well, the film isn't autobiographical, but I was certainly thinking a lot about these themes and about family and sort of our roles within a family, and especially when someone dies, how to fill that sort of vacancy. And I also wrote the film while I was living quite far away from Spain, so I think I was having these very sort of nostalgic feelings toward it, but also trying to examine them and because I think nostalgia is, a beautiful thing, but it's also a very tricky thing and can sort of color your memories in different tones that aren't exactly real. So I was very interested in building this sort of story about identity through grief for a girl whose imagination and few memories and reality are all sort of blending together. Yeah. I think I think I learned something about this what I was talking about earlier about these projections and these presences that we create when someone dies. That I think whether or not you believe in ghosts or not, I think we kind of need them to continue living on and to move forward and to have a grieving process. Um, yeah, and I think I also learned through this process that grieving in a family context is quite complicated, but can also be very luminous. There are a lot of complex emotions and taboos sometimes, especially with kids in families and like the younger generation. But I was really interested in this relationship that's intergenerational between the protagonist and the grandfather, and not necessarily going somewhere dark, but showing that this while this grieving process is quite imaginative and playful, um, it's also very luminous, and these two people sort of find each other in this darkness and find a light somehow. Yeah. Well, I think it's something we all go through, and something that I learned in the process of creating this character and writing this story is that I think I wanted this teenage girl who is like I was saying, in this moment in her life where you're trying on different masks. You're one person when you're with boys, you're someone else when you're with your family, and she finds this sort of curiosity in her dead grandmother, but she actually didn't know much about her, right? And especially the way she inhabits her as like a young person. She definitely didn't know who she was when she was that age. And so I think thinking about that, I realized that playing pretend kind of brings more of us out than of whoever we're playing, it kind of allows us to try things and to be ourselves in a way, or to make mistakes and see what happens. That's why I felt like it's a not necessarily I mean, there are certain connections, right, with her grandmother that are physical and um, certain traits that you inherit, right? But I think for me, this transformation brings something out of her rather than inhabiting this person she doesn't know. Yeah, yeah. I mean, while while the story centers for most of it around Kata and her grandfather and this sort of journey they have, I think the character of the mother is really interesting because she's the only one who sort of has her feet on the ground and wants to move on, and she's returning to this place that we don't quite know what happened, but there's a lot of tension between her and her father, and I think, when you're a teenager, the last person you want to look like is your mother. At that age, right? You're like, get out of my way. But there's a certain curiosity for the grandmother, right? And I was very interested in having that journey with Kata and her mother of sort of growing closer, and this experience of inhabiting the caretaker and Kata sort of not really feeling super comfortable with it, and sort of coming up with these sort of traditional roles that are not really her speed. It sort of opens her eyes to how her mother is feeling, and I love that scene between them in the bed, and also the one of the final scenes where they talk about crying and not sort of putting pressure on yourself to feel something, but to just be. um, that I was very interested in her coming of age, of realizing how much her mother is also doing for them. Well, I mean, Thoy, the main actress, was really great because she took Martina, who is the younger sister, the actress who plays the younger sister, sort of under her wing. Martina hadn't been in any films before, and there are obvious nerves, and so I think we did some sort of like improvisation exercises between them so that they could get comfortable with one another, but also I am very grateful that Thoy was like, you know, taking care of her as well and giving her the space. And, in those complicated scenes, we sort of talked about what was happening, and um, just let her feel the moment. And yeah, it was honestly very easy to work with both of them, and they immediately clicked. And they also happen to look a lot alike, so that was kind of crazy. But yeah, no, it was great. I think, I had the script written, but when we went into rehearsals, we didn't have that much time to rehearse, but we did, read through the scenes, and it was very helpful to have the actors sort of get into it and uh, construct the scenes with me. If something felt off, we would move it around or something like that. But I don't know, I just tried to be intuitive with it. I also have a younger sister, and so I recognize a lot of the behaviors. So it's, not necessarily word for word what I've lived with my sister. Obviously, it's not autobiographical, but I recognize that dynamic, and so it kind of comes naturally to me. I was very interested in sort of introducing the ghost in the most casual way possible in the film. One of the things that I think is like a pillar for me in the film is, if the characters who need to see it, and the characters who don't. The ghost, or this presence, as you say, is there to kind of help those who need it. And I wasn't really interested in kind of the sort of genre conventions of ghost stories. There's no sort of revenge, or it's not, this presence isn't coming back. There's no unfinished business, right? It's just a sort of a tool to reinforce the emotional journey. Um, and I also wanted that light specifically that moves around to be a light, to be luminous, and to not sort of bring any darkness into the space, to create a more like a tender relationship with it. Yeah. I think, well, I sort of pulled, like you said, from moments that I feel like that I've certainly lived, and that I feel like we all have. We've all sort of snuck into our parents' closet and tried on their shoes or their coats and had this relationship with the clothes of the other. Um, and I think apart from that, I was trying to find the most specificity possible, if that makes sense. I think while it's it's a very unconventional grieving process that this main character goes through, but I think even though maybe nobody has done this same thing, there's still relatability in the emotions, right? And that's what is sort of anchored in reality, and feeling like, time stops and you're not quite sure what's going to happen next, and everything you knew, about your life is suddenly kind of off kilter. And so I think I was always leading with those real emotions, and then sort of trying to create a more fictional journey for her, that still felt plausible. Yeah. On one hand, I was really interested in sort of setting this story about grief in like the most beautiful place possible, because I think that presence of the ocean can be so liberating, but also so claustrophobic. Even, the way it's almost sort of coming at them, and how the relationship with the sea sort of changes for the characters in the film. Um, but moreover, yeah, I was interested in sort of setting a rhythm that felt akin to what they were going through, right? Using these like very slow zooms, or these sort of very still long takes that kind of allow you to wander your eyes to sort of wander through the scene, and you know um, focus on different details, that I think on one hand feels like summer in many ways, that these sort of very long days, but also there's like a parallelism with grief, right? This idea of time stopping, and or time stretching even, and not quite knowing what comes next, and not wanting to know what comes next. I also was very interested in terms of the production design of creating this house that kind of felt also stuck in time. It to me it is very reminiscent of like a beach home where grandparents live, but it's also almost too perfect. Like all the colors sort of blend together, and kind of creating a palette for this world that is uh, very coordinated, but also quite cold for a summer film. Um, yeah. What's up with that? Yeah. Well, I feel like for a film that's sort of playing with, uh, imagination and reality, and those the ways in which, if you want to see something, you will see it. That is kind of like the thesis of the film. Um, I think animals are a very like grounding thing in films, because they're completely real and wild. Um, and so I was interested in introducing them. They all have kind of different meanings to me. For example, the cat is like the only witness apart from Kata of the death, and this idea of her not quite knowing whether anybody else sees it or not, sort of starts the glitches in her reality, where she does see the plastic dolphin, or she has this sudden connection with a memory that's not hers with the octopus, and then the ants that she only sees but nobody else does. Sort of this idea that these things that are apparently very real are also sort of melting her imagination with the reality. Mm. Completely, yeah. And it's like the mother says in the dinner, she thinks she lived this thing that she actually didn't, right? And the way in which I feel like you think about your first memories as a child, and now you're like, wait, did my parents tell me that, and so that's why I remember this thing, or did I actually do I actually remember it for myself? You know? The animals. um, I mean, shooting with a cat was a challenge that I did not anticipate. But other than that, I think we were very lucky that we had a really great team. Um, Not just, the actors were all wonderful, but also the team on set was really great and sort of all worked together and in collaboration. Um, I would say maybe the most challenging thing was dealing with weather patterns. We were shooting in the spring, not the summer, and so there were many days where it was rainy and cloudy, and we didn't anticipate having to deal with that, and kind of messed our entire schedule up. But what can you do, right? It's like you have to keep going. Yeah, yeah. It's a good question. Um, I think you always have an idea in your head of what the film is going to be, and it never is that. It's oftentimes, better because you have so many other people working and putting their sort of biggest efforts into it. Um, I think I was surprised by how, the relationship between Kata and her grandfather, how sort of little we had to do to create the tension between them. I think the circumstances are already so tense that they didn't have to sort of um, like over explain or over articulate anything, and actually the most subtle gestures were the most interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing is such a learning experience too. Like everything is a surprise, and every day you're sort of learning so much. But yeah, I think that was surprising in the making of it. Yeah. Um, I like both because I like control, but I would say I enjoy directing a lot more because it feels a lot more collaborative. Um, I would like to co-write uh, projects in the future because I think that would be very interesting, and sort of putting a couple of brains together to write a story. Um, so while I like both, I think I certainly feel more at home directing, if that makes sense. I love the collaborative process. I feel my most creative when I'm working with people that, are in a similar wavelength as mine, and can not just like enhance what I'm thinking, but also challenge it and question it, and always in a constructive way. But I think a project is always so much stronger when you have a group of people working together. Um, so yeah, I love directing. Yeah. Mm. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I'm gonna take some time to write and to think about what's next. I think I have a couple of projects that I am writing right now that are features. One is sort of revolves around the world of professional soccer or football in Europe, and the other one is about or revolves around car accidents and uh, the sort of ever presence of them in our lives. But yeah, thank you so much.